So we start off in the order of the program. We start with Dr. Olabisi Kuboni, who is a long-time constitutional activist. Somebody, as you heard, said earlier, worked with Dennis Pantin for a long time in talking about the Constitution, in writing drafts, and engaging in discussion on Constitution reform. And so she will start off by engaging what her major points are, and then we get into the discussion. Dr. Kuboni.
Okay, fine. Good evening, thanks, Chair, Moderator, and good evening, everybody. I just want to make one slight correction. Facts are important, they tell me. And I wasn't part of the original group of people starting up the CRF. My brother here was the person, not me, but good to be part of it. I would like to start with 3 points which I view as coming out of this whole notion of people power and constitution reform. And I could just tell you what the 3 are going to be. The first has to do with whether we think about changing the Constitution in terms of reforming the Constitution or amending the Constitution. I think that there is a distinction that we need to make where that is concerned. The second is having to do with the whole issue of people participation in the process of Constitution reform. And the third has to do with the business of whether or not the Constitution represents the diversity or is supposed to represent the diversity of the society. So let me go back to the beginning now. Are we going to reform the Constitution or amend the Constitution? We just had a bill that is named the Constitution Amendment Bill. Some people may feel this is a kind of a picky thing, change is change, whichever word you use. But there have been people in the past who have said, we don't need to go through this fundamental changing of reforming the Constitution. There's nothing wrong with the Constitution that we have now. All you need to do is to make some adjustments here and there, and you're good to go. I don't agree with that position. And I don't agree with it because I feel that a constitution is a reflection of a society, and therefore it embodies the shared ideas of how society should function, and it establishes the principles for the governance of that society. And if I set that as my framework, and when I look at the current constitution, I don't see a document that is reflective of that. We could probably talk about that a little more later on. When I look at the Constitution, I see largely a set of procedures of how things are supposed to be done. You have 10 people here, 5 people there. If you want to fire somebody, you follow step A, step B, step C, and so on. And even though there are a few areas where there's talk about responsibilities and roles, these are largely overshadowed by a set of procedures, low-level procedures as far as I'm concerned, of how things are to be done. And I feel that a constitution is supposed to be clearly grounded in some ideology and some philosophical framework, and I don't see any attempt to do that there. And also to clearly articulate roles and responsibilities. We've had a problem with not having clearly articulated roles and responsibilities for members of parliament. And lots of us were saying how we could talk about recalling somebody when the person is not, when the Constitution itself does not really state their roles and responsibilities clearly. Looking again at the whole issue of how I think that the Constitution as it stands now does not really meet our needs. 2 things just happened in the process of the amendment bill that we just went through. First of all of us knew that it only took a simple majority vote in the parliament, whether in the lower house or the upper house, to get that bill passed. I distinctly remember, I didn't understand much of what she was saying at that time, because these things escape me, these legalese. But section 54, I said, I think, and subsection something said something, and because of that, following that series of things that was said in section 54, the Prime Minister was able to say, and the Attorney General, that there was no need for either 2/3 or a 3/4 majority to pass the bill, and they could have used a simple majority. And probably they are right, given what is laid out in the Constitution. I find that it is unthinkable that it is so easy for our Constitution to allow, and apparently did, allow a major change like that as pertains to the system of voting in the country to be passed by a simple majority. The other one has to do with the power of the president to assent or not to assent. And we know there is beginning to be some kind of debate setting up there as to whether the president has that power. Simple, procedures that as a yea, nay kind of thing. And I feel that that's not what Constitution is supposed to be. So coming to the issue of it must be grounded in some kind of ideological position or philosophical position. My next 2 points have to do with that. People participation, the first one. And I think that must be reflected in 2 ways. One, in the way that the Constitution is actually changed, and 2, in the kinds of provisions that go into the Constitution. We went through the whole business of, the CRF participated in the consultations of the Constitution Reform Commission. One of the things that was said then was that Minister of Government ought not to be the person leading that commission. Many of us felt, yes, that was right, but say what? You give some, you lose some, and compromise, and you go ahead. And it turned out that that was a very wrong thing to do, right? A Minister of Government, we saw his partisanship coming down to the end, and where the whole business of people participation just fell completely by the wayside. So we have to, perhaps we could talk about this a little bit more later on. What are the mechanisms to be set up in the process of constitution reform so that you have the maximum possible people participation in a meaningful way? And then in terms of the Constitution itself, institutions must be conceptualized in such a way to reflect people participation. And I look at the whole business of, say, local government. Local government is one place where you ought to have, maximum people participation at the local community level, seeing about the business of the community at that level, at the local level, and so on. So therefore, in terms of people participation, I am just saying that when you think about the reform of local government, a core principle that should underpin that is people participation. And finally, the question of diversity and plurality. Given the nature of our society, we have to think of the Constitution being grounded in a principle that says, that gives a maximum priority to the whole business of people representing the diversity of the population. And it is important for that to happen because the winner take all, as I saw reflected in one of the articles by Professor Pantin, otherwise known in these days as majoritarianism, as the government, put as the principle on which the runoff was going to be based. It is important to reflect the diversity of the society because all must have the feeling that they are sharing in two ways. One, that they are sharing in the wielding of power in the society, and two, that they are sharing in the distribution of the resources of the society. Two things that are responsible for a lot of the conflict that we go through now in the society is that everybody doesn't feel that they are sharing in the power, in wielding power, feel that some have when one government is in and some don't have when that government goes out, and also in the case of the distribution of power. So what we have to think of, how can we work to develop a constitution that reflects and acknowledges the diversity in the society so that there is a sense that all of us are wielding power and all of